Hey, welcome back to another edition of What's It Like? I'm Jay Liebenguth, your host, and sorry I'm a little croaky today. I've got a little bug or something, but I didn't want to miss this interview. It's one of our favorites here around KPAO. It's Mark Langan, former police officer, now works with crimes perpetrated against our four-legged friends with the Humane Society. Mark, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Jay, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you because you've got a really interesting story.
Thank you.
You were on Storytime with Lydia, and we had such a great time listening to you, and you did such a nice job with Lydia that thought we'd love to have you back. And
well, it means a lot. Very much appreciated.
Yeah. So I'll let you carry a lot of this interview today since I sound like a frog, but I did want to talk to you a little bit about being a police officer. I know that you were the youngest police officer, to that time at least, hired by the Omaha Police Department.
Well, it's crazy to say now, and I was embarrassed for many years at the time when I was younger, but I was actually 18 years old for the first week in the police academy.
Wow.
And I turned 19 1 week into my training process, and way too young. In fact, I write in my book that my dad, the Chief Deputy United States Marshal here in Omaha.
So a federal employee.
Yes, had to register my gun for me because I wasn't 19 when I came on the job. So here I was, a police officer carrying a gun that my dad had to register for me. Quite embarrassing at the time. Now I kind of wear it as a badge of honor, to be honest with you. I'm getting older. But
Well, man, you had the support of your family.
I did. Well, Mom and Dad were none too happy I went into the police academy that young, I think. They wanted me to stay and possibly be an attorney or something like that. But from the time I was a little kid, I wanted to be a police officer. I was always around law enforcement with my dad. I write in the book about sitting at Blessed Sacrament School at 30th and Curtis and watching the cruisers roar up and down the 30th Street by Miller Park. And I used to tell myself, literally, I'd say, I'm going to be in one of those police cars one day chasing bad guys. And that's all I ever wanted to do, and realized my dream at a very young age, at 18 and then 19 when I hit the street.
So what was the driving force between, it just looked exciting, or was there something else that drove the idea of you being a police officer?
It was just the allure of being in that police car and chasing bad guys. And Adam 12 was my favorite show.
I remember that.
And just had a police scanner growing up. And I was just always drawn to that. I mean, as a 10-year-old kid, I knew the police phonetic code, A, Adam, B, boy, C, Charles, that the police still use.
The numbers,
Omaha
too?
Police Department, and the numbers and everything. I knew the 100 blocks of all the streets and everything. So I was kind of a nerd back then. I like to joke with people, but I'd hear a call come out on the police scanner, and I'd jump on my bike and try to race to get there before the police car would get there. So, but it was crazy when I was 19. I'm in a cruiser all of a sudden, and I write in the book, seeing things that most people our age now never see their entire life.
Thankfully.
And I'm 19 years old, thankfully,
Yeah.
and I'm 19 years old. So I write about the maturity process I quickly had to go through as a 19-year-old, or else the streets would have just eaten me up alive.
Right. So what was it like to be that young? I mean, there's a lot of things that I don't think we're necessarily prepared for, even in our mid-20s, in terms of trying to figure out how I make decisions. What was it like, and how do they train you for that?
Well, I write in the book about having the John Wayne syndrome. A lot of rookies have what we call the John Wayne syndrome, where we think we're really way more important than we really are. Right. But here I was, wearing a police uniform and carrying a gun and driving a police car at age 19. And I can tell people our age now, I could tell them what to do, and they had to do it because I was a police officer. So, but I did have to mature very, very quickly, realizing the things I was seeing, the homicides, the sexual assaults, the domestic violence calls and everything like that. And I just kind of learned early on to kind of compartmentalize these situations, take them seriously when I was working, go home, forget about them, and just make sure that none of that stuff applies to my own family. It's kind of the philosophy I always had, especially after I got married, had kids of my own. I'd see terrible things happening with kids, and I just made sure my kids never got put in that kind of position.
Yeah. One of the things we talk about on this show quite a bit is empathy, and chasing bad guys has one motive. It's to try and make the streets safer for the people who aren't doing bad things. But at the same time, there are people who are kind of driven. Not that there's good excuses for creating crime, but there are some things that are understandable. How did you begin to grow to understand that?
My dad, the federal marshal, gave me some advice when I came on the police department, and he said, and this is a man who transported federal prisoners all around the country and never had one escape on him, transported numerous FBI 10 most wanted prisoners and things. And he would always tell me that he would get in the car with the prisoners. Back then they transported everybody by car. And he would tell them, we're going to follow the rules, but I'm going to treat you with respect as long as you treat me with respect. And my dad would say, if I smoke a cigarette, I'm going to let you smoke a cigarette. If I take a bathroom break, you're going to get a bathroom break. And he said he never had any problems with any of them at all. So I used that philosophy when I came on the job. And, I was never purposely a jerk towards somebody. I mean, I was in charge, obviously, if I had to arrest somebody. But I treated people with respect, and I treated them like human beings. And it's amazing now, long after I retired and I've written this book, I have people that I've arrested on a routine basis, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. They'll come up to me like in a restaurant or wherever I might be, and they'll say, do you remember me? And most of the time I don't. And they'll say, you arrested me and I did like 10 years in federal prison, but I'm out now, I'm doing great, and thanks for treating me with respect. I had one guy come up and he said, do you know what I remember about you before you took me to jail? And I said, no. And he said, before you took me to jail, you let me smoke a cigarette. And that was my dad. I looked up at the heavens and I said, that's for you, because Dad always said, if I smoke a cigarette, the prisoners get to smoke a cigarette. Yeah. And I think Dad was kind of proud when he heard that story.
Yeah.
So it's nice having people come up to me after I've arrested them years later, and they're friendly and they're doing well, and we treat each other with respect.
I want to talk a little bit about literally what's it like. I can only imagine, and thankfully I don't have to do more than that. Thank you that there are men in blue and women in blue. Yeah. And even dogs in blue, yes, that are out there protecting our streets, our property, and our lives. But when you roll up on somebody late at night, and it's dark, and it's a neighborhood that has activity, what is it like? What does your adrenaline do? What does your mind go through? Are you checking off all the boxes? Are you creating, what is it that you do?
Well, most police officers will react to their training. When they get in a situation like that, they're aware of what's going on around them 360 degrees, which is tough, but they have to do it. They have to be ready for anything on a split-second notice. And, we hear a lot about police officers involved in shooting situations and, who fired first and should he have taken the shot and couldn't he have tasered or winged him or something like that. Believe me, if it comes down to a deadly force situation where a police officer has to deploy his or her gun, they've had a split second to make that decision. In the vast majority of times they make the right decision. We seem to hear about the ones frequently that don't make the right decision.
Yeah. So your adrenaline is up at that point. You're keeping your head on a swivel, so to speak. You're looking around. You're trying to remain calm, but at the same time, you've got to be ready for anything.
Oh, without a doubt, your adrenaline's flowing. My wife likes to say I thrived on stress for 26 years on the police department, and I did. I thoroughly enjoyed the situations like that. I mean, I hate to say I enjoyed them, but I did thrive on them. I enjoyed rolling up on a hot scene, not knowing what was going to happen. I enjoyed the idea of leading a team up to a house on a no-knock search warrant with a forcible entry to go in and catch some drug dealers that were armed on the other side of the door. We were highly trained on how to do that. I was, and my officers were, and we reacted to that training, but it does get to be kind of a adrenaline junkie type situation where you kind of enjoy those situations.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's being a part of a team too. You're consistently depending on those other people in that situation.
Well, we hear a lot of stories about the thin blue line and the brotherhood of blue and everything like that. That's absolutely true. Mm-hmm. Police officers are a very tight-knit group of individuals because I say this to every group that I talk to. I never say that police officers are better than anybody else, but police officers are different than anybody else because of the things that they see on a daily basis and the danger that they go into. And, my narcotics unit crew, and I was the leader of that crew for 18 years, on nights, we went through hundreds of doors and arrested hundreds of dangerous individuals. You develop a bond where you have to rely on each other to save each other in intense situations. So I love them like I love my own family. Probably spent more time with them than I did my own family. Mm-hmm. Still dear friends with all of them today.
You bring up an important point here, and I remember in your book you talked about being undercover. How is that different than wearing the badge and the uniform and the visible gun?
Huge difference, because I went from being a uniformed police officer to where I wanted people to know I was a police officer. 95% of civil disturbances, civil unrest, domestic disturbance calls, whatever it might be, are de-escalated immediately when that black and white rolls up and the police officers get out. 95% by far, because that's a very intimidating aspect to see uniformed police officers approaching you when you're committing a crime. Then all of a sudden I went from there to being undercover to where I don't want people to know I'm a police officer. So I had to change my mind frame in that my goal was to get in with these drug dealers, buy drugs from them, ultimately get them arrested without them finding out that I was in fact a police officer. And Omaha is certainly not like New York City. The chances of us being seen by somebody we know or something are pretty high here in Omaha in an undercover situation.
It's a small town.
It's a small town. It's a small, big town.
Right.
That's the way I like to describe it. So I was always on edge to make sure, one, I didn't get recognized, and two, that I got in, bought the drugs, and got out before something bad could happen.
Mark Langan is our guest. He's the author of Busting Bad Guys. Sorry, I really apologize for my voice today, but one of the things you were involved with is you had an officer shooting situation. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it happened on February 14th, 2002, at 30th and Madison. It was a situation that I had been involved in hundreds of similar type situations in my career, to where we had information a car would arrive in a parking lot with a large amount of narcotics, and our job was to go in and stop that car and arrest the individual. And the pursuit ensued after that. We could tell he was working his way back to his house, which happened a lot in these situations. I think people felt that their house was like home base, just like hide and seek when we were kids.
Tag, yeah.
You know, tag, you're it, and home base. And as he got out of his car and came down the street, he engaged us in gunfire, and myself and another officer shot and killed him. So when I decided to write the book, I knew I had to write this story because it was the most impactful story in my career. It was 32 shots in 13 seconds of a 26-year career that, in my mind, kind of defined my career. But I didn't want to write it like I was bragging or a grandiose situation or a macho situation, so I really try to treat it with respect in the book. But I write the gritty stuff about how he died in the street in front of us, and how I was taken down to the police station and treated like a suspect, given my Miranda warnings. That I had issued hundreds of suspects in my career. Now I'm getting my Miranda warnings. I'm a suspect in a criminal homicide.
At that point, was there any question that you did the right thing?
Funny you should say that. There wasn't. He pulled his gun out, shot at us first. We returned fire. But it's funny how the mind plays tricks. When I went home that night from that shooting scene, I remember laying in bed about 5 o'clock in the morning thinking, he did fire at us, didn't he? He did have a gun, didn't he? Even though I knew he did.
Yeah.
But my mind was playing tricks. During the shooting, you hear about audio exclusion, and my gun, I couldn't even hear it firing. I thought it was jamming and misfiring. I could not hear a thing, and his gun sounded like a cannon. I would have sworn the shootout took 3 minutes. It took 13 seconds. I mean, it's weird how the mind can play tricks like that. Yeah. So then I had to go through a grand jury. The grand jury cleared us. We had another very close call about a year later. That's when my wife finally said to me, and she had never had before, maybe it's time you start thinking about getting off the street. We kind of always believe in series of happening in threes. We had two very close situations. Then the Humane Society job called, and the rest is history.
How long had you been on the job at that point?
22 years. So I certainly was not a rookie when that happened.
Right, right.
And, we all reacted to our training. And I can't stress that enough to young police officers that I talk to. I go and talk to young police officers about this book, about the shooting, and I stress to them, training's no fun. It's more fun to be on the street doing it.
Right.
Take your training seriously. You will react to your training. Trigger squeeze, breath control, sight pattern, everything that's drummed into police officers' heads their entire career came into play on February 14, 2002, and probably saved our lives. So I'm a big proponent of taking training seriously.
It's that stuff that becomes automatic, so you don't have to think your way through it, right?
No, there was no thought process during that at all. It was just strictly instinctual reaction to the training that we had.
Right. What about the weeks after that and the months? I mean, I assume that grand jury was all a normal process of an officer-involved shooting.
It is a normal process, but it's still stressful because
Sure.
their determination will be if you're indicted for second-degree murder, manslaughter, or not indicted for anything. And even though I knew we were very good on the shooting, it's still stressful to go in and be on the other side of the bench, obviously.
And defend yourself.
And we had to
something
defend.
you knew was,
right. We had to defend ourselves.
us or them kind of thing.
Right. And then, I was off the street for 6 weeks, had to go to the police psychologist during that time. It was a stressful time for both me and my family.
Yeah.
And then about a couple years after that happens, after I retired, I get a call from the daughter of the suspect that we shot and killed, who wants to meet as a form of closure. And I remember thinking, do I really want to do this? I mean, what benefit could this have? But I could tell in her voice it was important to her. And we did meet. Myself and the other officer involved and the daughter met at a restaurant, had a very spiritual meeting from her on her part. she asked one question during the entire situation. She said, "Is there anything else you could have done besides shoot my father?" And having a daughter about the same age at the time, I wanted to be very empathetic towards her, but I told her no. I said, "Your dad made a decision that night. We had to react. Do I wish it wouldn't have happened? Yes. I wish it would not have happened. But it did happen, and we had to do what we had to do." Didn't hear much from her for a couple of years. Once the book came out, we've had some contact since then. She does support the book and what I wrote about it in the book.
That's good. That's good. That has to have some sort of closure for you as well.
It does. Not many police officers have contact with the daughter of a suspect they shot and killed. And I've had contact with her since then. She's doing very well, very happy to say. Given the odds that she had, given that her dad was a 3-time convicted felon, tried to kill some police officers, she has some obstacles growing up, but she's done very well for herself, and I'm very happy for her.
That's good. That's good. What is your thought process as you see an awful lot of news coverage on shoots these days? Is it empathy for your brothers in blue, or do you see some of those that may have additional mitigating kind of circumstances?
Oh, sure. There's been some situations in the media that I kind of cringe at as to how police officers handle, but there's been a lot that I also look at, and I feel a lot of empathy towards the police officers involved. There's not a job in the world that's critiqued more than that of a police officer. The public's enthralled with it. The media's enthralled with police work. And there's not an Omaha police officer on the street right now that couldn't, in the next 5 minutes, do something that could end up on CNN tonight and national news, and he or she could be vilified for the decision that they make. So, especially in this day and age with cell phone cameras and video cameras and things like that. So I have empathy on both ends, but I really feel bad for the police officers that get crucified in the media for situations that I look at and I'm like, wow, I might have done the same thing.
Do you think there's a chance that we have less people who want to serve as a result of?
It's a big concern I have. I think that the number of applicants have dropped for the Omaha Police Department and nationwide across the country since Ferguson, since some other situations. And I worry that with the lack of candidates, you're going to get your second and third tier people that would have been normally second and third tier people normally. But now that the applicant pool's dropped, I worry about the quality of applicants coming down the line.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about your service with the Humane Society. What drew you to that job? Was it just a chance to have a different way of serving?
I had no clue I'd ever work for the Nebraska Humane Society. I got a call from them in 2004. I was planning on staying about 3 more years on the police department, but they offered me a job, and I remember calling my wife. And I joke about this, and maybe I'm embellishing a little bit, but I called her and I said, I've got a chance to take a job with the Nebraska Humane Society, weekends off, day hours, and she basically said, if you don't take it, I'll kill you. I might be embellishing a bit, but that's kind of how I recall it. And, you know, I kind of owed it to her and the family. Yeah. Because I worked nights my entire career. My son and daughter, I missed a lot of their events. My wife did a great job raising them. And then once I got to the Humane Society, what great work. We help so many people, not just dogs and cats. You know, we help people there too. It's just amazing the number of people that hoarding cases, you know, animal hoarders, or people are just involved in bad situations that we can line them up with animals to help them get through that situation. It's very fulfilling work that we do at the Nebraska Humane Society.
Are people curious about your work? I mean, do they believe that there's a role there? Because I think most people think about the Humane Society, pick up the stray dog in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. You were actually treated as a police officer within that organization.
You know, the animal control officers make 39,000 calls a year in Omaha.
Wow.
And people don't realize that. It's quite a busy operation. We're one of the biggest freestanding shelters in the country. We take in 25,000 animals a year inside that shelter. So it's a busy operation. I do have a big advantage being a former police officer in my role because I have great contacts in the community with law enforcement and prosecution. We just did the first ever cockfighting investigation a couple weeks ago. We arrested an individual through the Omaha Police and seized about 20 fighting birds. Wow. So we'll be prosecuting that case. We've done felony animal cruelty cases. We did a dog fighting case when I first started there. So, you know, when I retired, my narcotics crew put posters all over the Omaha Police saying Mark Langan's gone from busting meth labs to chasing black labs. And it's not too far-fetched, but I still...
The fetch pun is intended.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even know I said that. And but it is still a law enforcement related job. Yeah. and I thoroughly enjoy it.
Well, I think most people have a little bit more empathy with animals than sometimes they do with their human counterparts. I think most people look at it, why would anybody mistreat that dog when maybe that doesn't exist as much for the family member or...
And the Omaha Police, I'm sure, would tell you that their most popular Facebook posts involve dogs. Mm-hmm. And we have more Facebook followers than almost anybody in the city of Omaha.
Is that right?
And it's just amazing the support that we have at the Nebraska Humane Society. And animal stories in the media generate a huge buzz on both sides of the issue, but there's always a lot of emotion when it comes to like an animal cruelty case or a hoarding case or a bad dog bite or whatever. A lot of emotion is stirred up.
What's the big misunderstanding about humaneness with animals right now? What are people missing?
I think what people are missing with the Nebraska Humane Society is we're not an animal rights organization, we're an animal welfare organization.
Okay.
We realize public safety is number one when it comes to people and animals, but we place the animals very high, number two, in that situation. Our job is to look out for, our job here at the Nebraska Humane Society is to make sure people are safe from animals and animals are safe from people. And that's a real balancing act sometimes.
What are they trying to get you to do? Are they trying to get you to legislate these puppy mills, or I mean, is that part of the?
We do a lot of legislative work in the state legislature. We passed 12 or 13 bills as I've been there in regards to animal cruelty, improving animal cruelty laws, increasing the number of inspectors that go after puppy mills, state of Nebraska inspectors. Puppy mills are a real problem here in the state of Nebraska. We made laws easier for prosecutors to get convictions on animal cruelty cases. And these are bills that have had full support of the Nebraska State Legislature. So we're not coming in with an animal rights agenda. We're coming in with valid laws on animal cruelty cases that the Nebraska State Legislature agrees with and passes.
Yeah. I want to close today with a couple of questions about you. About if you were speaking to a new recruit, you know, thinking about the 18, 19-year-old that you were, what would you say to them? How would you help them understand the importance of empathy and not just chasing bad guys?
Well, and I have told them this. Your job, I would tell them, will be a lot easier if you treat people like human beings and not like criminals or worse than that. The better connection you can have with people in the street, the better free flow of conversation you have, the more honesty you have towards people, the easier your job's going to be. And that's really true. We learned how to talk to people, especially when it's in the narcotics, drug dealers and informants and things like that. The more connection you make with people, the easier your job's going to be. If you come across as the dictator who's going to come in as my way or the highway, you're going to have a hard time on the streets.
Yeah. This is the second time, as we mentioned, that I've met you, and I don't see you as that person that's that real hardliner. You know, I know that TVs and movies portray people who get things done in a, and they're always being yelled at by their captain, all of that.
Right.
It seems like that's probably the larger percentage of police officers. So what is it the public need to understand about the role of a police officer in society?
That they're human beings with families just like they are. The problem I have is a lot of police officers don't do anything to help that cause with the public. That's why I tell police officers, get to know the people in your area. Go in the quick shops, go into the schools, whatever. Let them know who you are. You're there to protect them. You're in it with them. You need their help as much as they need your help. And that'll make your job a lot better. But, I'll end on this. On like a nice 65, 70-degree day, I just shake my head when I see a police car going down the street with the windows rolled up. Roll your window down, wave to the people, get to know the people. Your job will make it be a lot easier.
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. If that's a directive. I understand it's a very visible and a very dangerous job a lot of the time. But I think that community service and community contact is a part of that job, or at least should be.
Well, Chief Schmatter, who does a great job here in Omaha, and I really admire the chief, says, every time I see him talk, he says the same thing: we're only as good as the public we serve. We need your help. We can't do anything without the help from the public. And he's done a great job all over the city getting these neighborhood groups to buy into the police department. And he has his officers going out to functions and getting to know the people. And, we used to call it community policing back in the 80s.
Right.
That's exactly what it is. And Chief Schmatter does a great job of realizing that the police department is only as successful as the citizens allow them to be.
Mark Langdon has been my guest. Thank you, Mark, so much for your continued service to this community.
Thanks. I really enjoyed it, Jay.
We really, really appreciate all you do. both in your former career and your current career, and we wish you many, 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 many more years of service to this community.
Thank you so much.
It's a great book. It's called Busting Bad Guys. It's on sale at places where people buy books still.
Bookworm, Amazon, all over the place.
Yeah, and chances are you can see him at a farmer's market or a Rotary or somewhere else. Mark, thank you so much for helping us to understand a little bit better what it's like.
Thanks again, Jay. Book about sitting at Blessed Sacrament School at 30th and Curtis and watching the cruisers roar up and down the 30th Street by Miller Park. And I used to tell myself, literally, I'd say, I'm going to be in one of those police cars one day chasing bad guys. And that's all I ever wanted to do. And realized my dream at a very young age, at 18 and then 19 when I hit the street.
So what was the driving force between it just looked exciting, or was there something else that drove the idea of you being a police officer?
It was just the allure of being in that police car and chasing bad guys. And Adam 12 was my favorite show. And,
I remember that.
And just had a police scanner growing up. And I was just always drawn to that. I mean, you know, as a 10-year-old kid, I knew the police phonetic code, A Adam, B boy, C Charles, that the police still use.
The
on
numbers
Omaha
too?
Police Department, and the numbers and everything. You know, I knew the 100 blocks of all the streets and everything. So I was kind of a nerd back then. I like to joke with people, but you know, I'd hear a call come out on the police scanner, and I'd jump on my bike and try to race to get there before the police car would get there. So, but it was crazy when I was 19. I'm in a cruiser all of a sudden, and I write in the book, seeing things that most people our age now never see their entire life.
Thankfully.
And I'm 19 years old, thankfully,
Yeah.
and I'm 19 years old. So I write about the maturity process I quickly had to go through as a 19-year-old, or else the streets would have just eaten me up alive.
Right, right. So what was it like to be that young? I mean, there's a lot of things that I don't think we're necessarily prepared for, even in our mid-20s, in terms of trying to figure out how I make decisions. What was it like, and how do they train you for that?
Well, I write in the book about having the John Wayne syndrome. A lot of rookies have what we call the John Wayne syndrome, where we think we're really way more important than we really are. But here I was, you know, wearing a police uniform and carrying a gun and driving a police car at age 19. And I can tell people our age now, I could tell them what to do, and they had to do it because I was a police officer. So, but I did have to mature very, very quickly, realizing the things I was seeing, the homicides, the sexual assaults, the domestic violence calls and everything like that.